Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Charles Sabanson, and welcome you guys to another episode of the Dreamers Pro Show. We cover everything from sports, hot topics, classic debates, entertainment, and we give you guys a fresh perspective on things. We see them. Today we have a pretty interesting show for you guys, but before we get into it, please make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you're not following us on Instagram, the name of our channel is Dreamers Pro on Instagram. If you're not following me on Instagram, my handle is CTABANZ. And if you want today's full show before it comes out on YouTube, it's streaming on the Dreamers Pro podcast. We have pinned below. Anyway, let me get into this topic here. First of all, Happy New Year. This is actually our first official shows of the new year because we decided to take some days off. But now that we're refreshed and we're ready to go again, we're coming back with a lot of energy. And during our break, I noticed that there were a lot of stories taking place in the news, right? A lot of stories. And one of them was centered on, a very big personality, the biggest independent sports media personality in Pat McAfee before he joined ESPN. As you guys know, Pat McAfee had a very big show, the Pat McAfee Show, which was focused on the NFL. He could talk about other things, but that's really what it was focused on. His show and podcast did so well that it was able to land him a very lucrative deal with FanDuel, paying him over $20 million per annum, right? Then that deal, for whatever reason, he didn't continue it. And then he surprised all of us when he said that he was going to be joining ESPN, right? A move that surprised a lot of us. And at the time that move and that announcement was made, a lot of his core audience members were a bit concerned about that, because if you know anything about Pat McAfee, he's raw, he tells it like it is, and his show has a particular way that they produce their shows, right? Very raw, interesting, fun, witty, off the cuff, not contrived, although you can tell that they put a lot of work into it. And a lot of people were worried that if he were to join ESPN and go join them, they were going to put constraints on him. But at the time, Pat McAfee spoke about the benefits of joining ESPN, given the fact that he's going to be on a bigger platform, how it's going to grow his brand even further, and how he's going to give it a shot. Having a show on television while still having it on YouTube. And at the beginning, it was all kumbaya. I saw him doing his press run for ESPN, flying all over the place, and he seemed to be very, very excited. But over the last few months, there's been one hiccup after the other. The last one was centered on some comments that one of his reoccurring guests, and Aaron Rodgers, made about Jimmy Kimmel, who I believe is also employed by Disney, right? And I'm not going to get into the details of it. I'm sure some of you who are already aware of the story know what it is. And then we started hearing rumblings about how Pat McAfee may be forced by ESPN to put out a public apology after Jimmy Kimmel responded to the comments that Aaron Rodgers made on his show. That happened. And then out of nowhere, about 2 days ago or so, Pat McAfee was actually doing his show. And in the middle of his show, he just went off, on a tangent, just went off in a totally different direction and actually started accusing a top ESPN executive of sabotaging his show while he was on the ESPN airwaves. So for those of you who didn't hear what Pat McAfee had to say, I'm going to quickly play his comments for you now, and then we're going to come back and continue on the show. Take a listen to what Pat McAfee had to say there.
We're very appreciative, and we understand that more people are watching this show than ever before. We're very thankful for the ESPN folks being very hospitable. Now, there are some people actively trying to sabotage us from within ESPN. Funny. More specifically, I believe Norby Williamson is the guy who is attempting to sabotage our program. I'm not 100% sure. That is just seemingly the only human that has information, and then somehow that information gets leaked, and it's wrong, and then it sets a narrative of what our show is. And then are we just going to combat that from a rat every single time? I don't know. But somebody tried to get ahead of our actual ratings release with wrong numbers 12 hours beforehand. That's a sabotage attempt. And it's been happening basically this entire season from some people who didn't necessarily love the old edition of the Pat McAfee Show to the ESPN family.
Sure.
There's a lot of those. We've heard them anonymously quoted in the Washington Post, in the New York Post, in the New York Times, in the LA Times, in Wall Street Journal. And they're never love the show.
This is awesome.
It's always little things to try to tear us down. So even with the enemy within our own camp, somebody that I don't like that guy. That guy left me in his office for 45 minutes, no-showed me in 2018. So this guy has had zero respect for me. And in return, same thing back to him for a long time. So even with that taking place and potential PR, like we're still growing somehow.
Yep.
So we're very thankful.
Yeah.
I think we're doing it right. We're trying to do it as right as possible. Mm-hmm. We have good intentions every single time we come in here. We don't always get it right, but has been getting it wrong for a long time in this specific field. Long time.
Every day. Every single day. What do you mean? Like you said, you have the right intentions. Like, we're trying to sit here and have fun and talk about sports.
Bingo.
So you heard what Pat McAfee had to say, right? These are very, very explosive comments, and it really shook up the sports world because you never see this happen. When was the last time you saw an ESPN personality go out there and publicly criticize one of their executives on air? It almost never happens. As a matter of fact, I can't even think of an instant when it did happen in the past. I can't think of one. So it was totally unprecedented. That's number one. Number two, we got to look at the caliber of personality. We're talking about Pat McAfee, one of the biggest sports shows out there, period. And he's the one saying this, which means that he has a pretty big audience. And I think that this is what the people that were skeptical about him ultimately joining ESPN were afraid of. I think that they felt like Pat was going to have a muzzle on him. Obviously, ESPN, Disney, they have certain political leanings. And given the fact that Pat McAfee seems to be a free thinker, seems to have people on his show that have various views, and some people have said really the heart of all of this is because of the COVID vaccine and all of that, some people thought that inevitably there was going to be some friction down the road. And that's what we're seeing now. Only God knows what's going to happen now because Pat McAfee, if you guys aren't aware, he's actually still under contract. And I think he also has a non-compete. So if Pat McAfee were to leave ESPN, he could go nowhere until he sees out the duration of his contract. It is that serious. So this morning, I was doing some research and I came across a plethora of articles. One of them is from SE Scoop, kind of reporting what Pat McAfee said. But then there's another one here that I saw from NBC Sports, and it has the following headline: ESPN will handle Pat McAfee. Norby Williams issue internally. Continues on. The summer went to full boil on Friday between ESPN and Pat McAfee, with McAfee accusing ESPN executive Norby Wilson on ESPN's platform of sabotaging his show and being a rat. On Saturday, ESPN issued a statement presumably aimed at defusing the situation. No one is more committed to and invested in ESPN's success than Norby Williams. ESPN said, we are thrilled with the multiple platform success that we have seen from the Pat McAfee show across ESPN. We will handle this matter internally and have no further comments. The use of the word internally contrasts sharply with McAfee's decision to take the beef publicly. On Friday, Alex Sherman of CNBC reported that ESPN is looking into the matter, but ESPN has no plan to suspend McAfee. Instead, ESPN hopes to find a path forward for Williamson and McAfee. And then the article goes on to say a few other things. You guys can go out there and read the rest of it. They have to handle it. You know why? Because there's a lot of money on the line. There's a lot of money on the line. And in situations like this, you don't want to act abruptly and emotionally because you don't want to make a decision now out of anger, out of frustration, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, we actually can't make that decision. But to me, it really speaks to the bigger question that I think a lot of us have to wrestle with, which is this. Whenever you go from being independent to working with bigger corporations, this is always going to be the struggle. You're going to have to let go of certain things. And maybe for Pat McAfee, as someone that is clearly an entrepreneur, maybe he's having challenges with this. Maybe he's finding it hard to work for other people. And there are people like this. There are people like this that they're great. They can do great work. But the moment that you start putting constraints on them, you have a problem. But in the case of Pat McAfee, he signed up for it. And you got to know that there was going to be a plus and minus. With ESPN, you know that there's certain restrictions. There's certain things you can and cannot say. We all know this. And I would like to believe that Pat McAfee knew this going in. And maybe he did, and he just reached a point where he's like, I'm going to call it like it is. And maybe nothing will happen to me. It remains to be seen. I don't know. Right? But I think this is one of the biggest stories in sports in terms of, from the business standpoint. Because however things happen here, is going to dictate how things happen in the future. Because if ESPN lets Pat McAfee just walk off scot-free and not handle the situation in any way, in any shape whatsoever, then it's going to set a bad precedent, because then what's going to happen next? When another employee that's feeling disgruntled he gets upset, he's going to come out on the air and start calling out a particular executive. It's going to be a disaster. So I think, I'm going to be following this story pretty closely to see how it plays out. So what I want to know from you guys, number one, what do you think about Pat McAfee coming on air saying what he said? Do you think it was right? Do you think it was professional, or he had the right to say it? Number two, how do you think ESPN will handle this thing moving forward? Whatever you guys think, please leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section. We catch you guys on the next show. Peace.